Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Latched Mama podcast. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Latched Mama podcast is a podcast for mothers and families in the trenches of motherhood. We have a little bit of a different episode today. We're interviewing Rachel Somerstein, who just released an absolutely incredible book called Invisible Labor, the Untold Story of the C-section. So for those of you who are maybe pregnant or getting ready to give birth or perhaps had a traumatic experience, we are going to get a little bit into some of the details of Rachel's experience and some of her journey. So just a heads up, it could get intense at times. So just want to make sure that you guys are aware of that and tread lightly into this episode.
You're listening to Latched Mama Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Wirt, busy mom of 6 and owner of LatchedMama.com. Join us each week as we talk about pregnancy, breastfeeding, postpartum, and all things motherhood.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
As somebody who is ending the journey of writing a book right now that is not on a topic that is quite as heavy and life-changing as yours, but still took so much vulnerability for me to put out there and the journey of all of the years it took. I just look at your book and it feels like such a gift to every woman, family, every human being who picks it up. So I wanted to start there as somebody who has been in the trenches, like I said, writing about something that is not as hard to write about, I'm sure, but vulnerable. I can't even imagine what a journey it's been for you. So hopefully you found some healing along the way. Yeah.
And also just writing a book, any book it's like you have it's like actually like having a baby.
Absolutely.
Once you've gone through it, you have a totally different understanding of what it takes and respect for, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no. Yeah. And that has like been one of the biggest takeaways for me is like, I appreciate every single book that I see anywhere now, because I'm like, this wasn't just like, hi, I'm going to just sit down and I'm going to write something, or AI is going to help me here. No, I mean, it is such and it transforms you as a human being. So why don't you tell people a little bit about your journey and what kind of led you to writing this book? And I know that's a very big question. I'm gonna let you take it however you're feeling today and whatever direction you want to take it.
So for people, just so they know like a little background about me. So I'm an associate professor of journalism. So my job is to teach students how to do journalism and then also study journalism. So a few years ago, I was working on a project that was really, really different. And I had this moment where I was like, why am I doing this project? I'm not invested in the way that, frankly, you need to be to see a book project through. And also I realized that my birth in 2016, which was a traumatic C-section, was the most important thing that had ever happened. Like, it totally changed the way I think about my identity. It changed the way I interact with physicians and like the medical system. It made me aware of the ways that, a person like me, and I'll say like, I have a lot of advantages, right? I have a full-time job. I have great insurance. I'm married. I'm white. I'm middle class, Even a person with these advantages could experience really obstetric violence, right? And not have the agency that I kind of had expected to have going into pregnancy and birth. So for those reasons, I decided I was like kind of poised to write, right? Like that's kind of like my field. But also I was like, this is not to do this would have been like to be in total denial actually about how the birth had shaped me. And then when I started to explore my own experience, I also was like, you know what? I don't want to write a memoir. That is not for me. I want to better understand C-sections overall. And I want to understand how we transformed as a country from most people having babies attended by midwives with a very low C-section rate to where we are now, which is C-sections are 1 in 3 births.
And you know what I think is so beautiful about the book is that although you just said you didn't want to write a memoir, there's so much of your own vulnerable story tied in with the prescriptive nature of, hey, let me educate a little bit. Let me share myself so women feel connected. And let me also educate and tell them about, what is happening and make people feel less alone. And what I really, really love about the book, and why I think people, really anybody in their childbearing years or well past it, need to pick it up, is that one of the largest takeaways that I found through running this community of 1 million moms over the past decade is that you have absolutely no idea how your birth is going to turn out.
100%.
You can go in with
Yes.
this like amazing birth plan, and you can even have A, B, C, D plans, and
Yes.
life is going to throw you an E or an F. Motherhood has the ability to
Yes.
literally knock you on your butt and teach you something that it sounds like you kind of tried to scathe away a little bit from actually learning, actually feeling it and learning it and working through it and stuff. And it stops you. At some point it catches
Yes.
up to you. So I think what's really, really beautiful about your story and the book and the gift that you gave, especially childbearing women, is that it educates you, but it also makes you feel seen. So either whether you even read it before and you never end up with a C-section, or you read it after you've had one, it really allows women to feel less alone. And I think that is the biggest gift that we can give other moms in this world. I think
that means so much to me. I can't thank you enough. That was like literally my goal, because when I had this baby after this, first of all, I should say, even if my C-section had been like slam dunk amazing, I was totally unprepared for a C-section.
Yeah.
I did not know anything. I didn't even know what happens when you go into the operating room. I didn't even know why you have them. Like, I didn't know how you recover. I didn't know. So I really wouldn't have been prepared. I still would have been like, what just happened?
Yeah.
And when I was trying to recover, I was like, where are the C-section stories?
Yeah.
Where are they? If they're so common, why am I not seeing them? And I really felt isolated and alone. And
And I think that 1 in 3 statistic is staggering on both sides. It's staggering that many women are having C-sections because they're probably not all needed. But it is also staggering on the other side, or eye-opening on the other side, that women should feel less alone. Because it's not failure. Because it is happening all of the time. And I think that is the piece that I think is so beautiful about the way you incorporated your own story and your own kind of healing journey with the idea that, it's happening. Why is it happening? Is it happening more than it needs to be happening? And hey, you know what? It's okay. We're still rock star women for getting through this and having babies. One of the biggest takeaways and one of the biggest things that I've learned kind of through this whole journey, I have 6 kids, by the way. I successfully had them all with a midwife out of the hospital. So it's very polar opposite stories though. But I think something that we miss in America is that the way you have your baby matters. And I don't mean that in the way of like, hey, it's great if you can have a vaginal birth or whatever. It just means that we spend so little time actually exploring how we feel personally about how our child comes earthside. And then all of a sudden our child is earthside and in our arms, and we're like, holy moly, that whole process between the hormones that happen in our body to our body's changes, it's all such a extreme event. And then we're handed a baby and we're supposed to be moms. And I think it has blown my mind through having so many babies myself and watching other women have them, that it's supposed to be like, hi, you go to the hospital or you have a baby, the baby's born, and then you're supposed to be a mother. And this catastrophic event has happened in your life, whether it goes perfectly well or whether it goes completely sideways and upside down. And we're supposed to be moms and we're supposed to raise these little humans.
Yes. And if you have feelings that are complex, which I actually don't know anybody who doesn't have all kinds of feelings about their births. That's totally normal. But we're not supposed to express them, And the feedback that a lot of people get, and that I certainly got, was, well, at least you have a healthy baby. And it's like, everybody wants a healthy baby. Of course, you don't go through pregnancy and birth if you don't want a healthy baby. Yeah. But you matter too. And you are, it's like, it's almost as if like having a healthy baby should negate all of your feelings or your experiences or whatever. And it can't. And even if you think about like people who have postpartum mood disorders, it's like, you can't actually have a healthy baby without a healthy mom, right? Like we're together.
Yeah. It's so interesting too, because I think so many of the things that happen, like the postpartum mood disorders and things like that, are also an incredibly other symptom of the fact that like these huge events happen in our lives, and literally it's a happy baby. And then women are ignored. Sometimes their feelings, our mental health system is so broken. There's nobody to help us through it because, oh my gosh, you're alive. I'm sorry that that was a painful experience for you. Like, I'm sorry that that wasn't what you were expecting, but oh my gosh, look at your baby. Isn't it beautiful? Yes. And it's so dismissive and so hard. And then, you know, you get into a country with, you know, a lack of leave and childcare.
Exactly.
And it is one of the first messages I feel like that we get as mothers, that we don't matter ourselves, you know, and it's just the baby.
I totally agree. And then, you know, to expect that also, if you don't, I mean, you said this earlier, like it will catch up with you. So to expect that if you don't deal with this stuff, or people will avoid it, it'll go away. I mean, you know, talking to other moms with birth trauma, it's like sometimes your kid's birthday is a very hard feeling. And I have 2 children now. One of the births was wonderful. And I also still on his birthday, sometimes I feel sad at his getting older. It's not about birth trauma. It's just like the true complexities of watching your children grow up. But to have feelings where you can't fully feel like you can celebrate the way you would want to, it's almost like taboo. Like you can't, like what are you trying to steal the show from your birth? You know, and it's like, you don't even, for a person who has had a traumatic birth, I think you're not even in charge of that. Like your body's just going to respond the way it responds. And that's not like, because you don't love your baby enough or like you're not happy to be a mom. You know what I mean? It's like, again, if we don't have space in our culture to care for the moms, which includes mental health, paid leave, right?
Absolutely.
Childcare.
Yeah.
You know, how are you ever supposed to, I think, like be the kind of non-reactive, loving, present parent we want to be.
Absolutely.
You know?
And then that just starts this crazy shame spiral. Like,
exactly.
Oh my gosh, it's 5:00 on my kid's birthday and I'm being reactive. Let me slow down this chaos and these grandparents and these presents and these excited kids to figure out why I'm being reactive. Oh, I'm being reactive because I'm still working through this traumatic experience that happened, which it is fine to be doing 7, 8, 10, 12 years later. But hold on. Let me slow this whole situation down and make space for myself and these feelings so I'm not reactive. It's just wild. It is absolutely wild to be just kind of in this space where we're expected to operate at this super, super high, I feel like, performance level, every mother. And we put it on ourselves and other people have it. But without other people slowing down in most cases to make space for us, you know what I'm saying? And it's
100%.
It is wild. Can you, if you are willing to, can you tell me a little bit about kind of the hours or the time after the birth or after the C-section where you were, I'm sure, amazed by what had happened, but kind of like, here's your baby. Don't worry about it. Like how did you kind of work your way through that time?
So it's really foggy for probably because I was in shock, but also because of all of the opioid medication that I've been given. But my first memory after her birth was I was in the recovery room and I should say, should I say what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Feel.
So
yeah,
I'm not like shy about it. Yeah.
Okay.
So I had, I was, the labor, I write about this in the book. The labor was sort of a disaster. My people taking care of me didn't really listen to me. They didn't hear me when I said I was in a lot of pain. I was having back labor. And when I got hooked up to the monitors and I had an epidural, then my providers were like, oh, those are really monster contractions. Like, it was like, we don't believe you until the computer says what you're saying.
Absolutely.
So again, even if the C-section had gone well, it was not a good birth. Yeah. And then my daughter had heart rate deceleration. So the midwife was like, it's time to call the C-section and you're really tired and the baby's tired. And I was so scared going into the operating room. I thought I was going to die. I thought my baby was going to die. I was, again, like this was so beyond my field of vision as a possibility. So that's part of why I was scared. But I also think, in retrospect, right? It was 1:30 in the morning. I'd been in labor for 24 hours. Nothing went the way that the birth class I took said would go.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. Which usually doesn't, right? That's not like exceptional to me. But I didn't know that. And I didn't trust the people taking care of me. And they didn't try to, at the time even, really see me and make me feel better. Like the vibe was like, this lady's like kind of freaking out. you know,
So-
and I was.
Yeah,
And
which rightfully so. Were there like alarms going off at this point, or do you feel like just advice? Like I'm just like the takeaways. Like,
Yeah.
could the process have slowed down for like 5 minutes and just said, "Hey, this is what's happening. You're gonna be okay." Like, was there that level of compassion at all at that point? Do you remember?
It's a great question. And there was not that level of compassion, but medically there could have been. So
Okay.
a lot of moms I've talked to have been like, I had an emergency C-section. And one thing I think that's important for people to know is that emergencies, like life or death, the baby has to be out in 5 minutes,
Yep.
are very, very rare. Thank God. And thank God we have C-sections and skilled surgeons who can do those
Absolutely.
safely. An unplanned section can be quite urgent, right?
Yep.
Like we've got 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Or an hour, decision to incision. There's enough time, usually, at least there was for me, and especially in these less urgent, but baby has to come out situations, where a provider could say, hey, I'm going to take 5 minutes. I'm going to sit with you.
Yep.
I'm going to hear you. I'm going to be present with you.
Yep.
I'm going to explain what's going to happen. Here's why we made this decision, or here's why we recommend this decision, right? In shared decision making. You're going to be safe. And people did try to reassure me, right? It's not like I was being ignored,
Yeah.
but I wasn't seen. And I think that I know that that's part of what was so difficult about my birth. And in talking to other moms, it's like the similar kind of feeling, right? Like I wasn't heard by my providers.
Yeah. It was really interesting because Ashley, who does a little bit of PR with for us here, and she was like, she got to your NPR article or your NPR interview before I did, and she had, you know, she sent me notes. She's like, Melissa, her story is like really, really moving, and Ashley doesn't have kids, and she's like, you know, she felt her C-section. And I was like, and I wasn't dismissive at the beginning, but I was like, oh, it was probably a crash C-section. Oh my gosh, how traumatic that was. But then I actually dug in, and like, you know, I was partly through the book and I had the article, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this was such a failure, and absolutely what you just said was being seen. And that is so hard for me because it starts there. It actually starts in prenatal care. It probably starts for females long before that. But if we're staying in this little chapter here, it starts in prenatal care. And then it goes to here. And then it goes, like I said, for so many other moments in motherhood. And it's this idea that some terrible Handmaid's Tale way where sometimes the vehicles to bring these babies to the world, and maybe in like this really beautiful way, we just seem women are just strong, or maybe we appear to be okay. They probably knew physically you were okay, so why not slow down the process? But that you're gonna be fine. They were just gonna do a C-section. Right. 1 in 3 women get them. It's gonna be fine, and you're gonna find your way through it. You're gonna write a book one day. It's gonna be great, you know. But it's wild to me that we sometimes dismiss the ginormous change that is about to happen in terms of how our babies come into the world.
Totally. And that even though it's the most common operation in the world, it's still one person's birth.
Yeah.
And that disconnect, right, is potentially a problem. And that women aren't listened to for beginning in girlhood, right?
Yeah,
like when you say you're in
absolutely.
pain in particular, and that's worse for women of color, right? Than for white women.
Yeah. And that's what's wild as you tell this story. And as I read your story and I process it, just thinking at the magnitude that we're 2 white women right here talking to each other, but the magnitude of the way that this happens for women of color is, I mean, this is like a common story for them in many cases. It's just not being heard.
Yeah. And that, in talking to other moms who'd had really bad experiences, moms of color, I was able to see like there were a terrible thing happened to me, right? I C-section. I did not have adequate anesthesia. I felt it. My OB, when I said I felt that, he said, you'll feel pressure. I said, I felt that. And he kept going, right? He did not listen. That was it's unbelievable. And when I talked to other moms of color who'd had similar experiences where their pain was dismissed, they were further marginalized, right? In other ways subsequent than I was, even though I also was still like not treated kindly by people in the hospital, by some people in the hospital. I should make that clear. There were some amazing, one nurse was incredible. She was so compassionate. Actually the anesthesiologist was really a humane person. He came to my bedside and he apologized to me. And then there were other people who blamed me for it. So again, it's not like there was this terrible thing that happened. People came and apologized, and, you know, I still am having issues getting over it, understandably. I was also blamed. Some people were more humane compared, though, with women of color, where it's like they were, you know, like this one mom, for instance, she had a shoulder dystocia, and her daughter, and she had a home birth, and she came into the hospital with her daughter. She's Black. She's a professor. She's married at the time, like all things that should protect you, like your level of education, et cetera. And she felt like she was really treated like, you dumb Black woman. And her daughter was having, what's it called? Seizures in the NICU. And she was like, can I see like the video of it? I just want to, and they were like, no. And and it was just this distrust of her. And in talking with her, you know what, we have a lot in common, right? We're both professors. We've both had these like tough births, you know? And I'm like, nobody would have said that to me, right? Like as a white mom. And that it's just to be able to imagine, even if you're not a person of color, like, okay, you're being maybe marginalized and having these bad experiences, and you're also escaping some of the worst stuff, right? That moms of color have to face.
So was there anybody post kind of C-section 6-week follow-up or 4-week, whatever you had with the C-section, that started to hold space for your story at all? Or was it continually, you know, like what was the role that the midwife played in this, like on the other side?
You know, I remember seeing her. So first of all, like right afterward, maybe a day or two later, she said to my husband, you know, maybe the baby would have just slid out. She felt tremendous regret.
Yeah.
And guilt. And that's clearly not true, right? Like nobody was helping me into different positions or move, right? Like it's like it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think my 6th week was like, oh, maybe we could, you know, go for a walk and talk. But I felt I had no interest in doing that. It was like kind of, I didn't trust you in the birth. You didn't hear me in the birth. This terrible thing happened. I'm sure she was traumatized by it too, by the way. Like, nobody wants to see this happen, you know, and it was terrible. But it wasn't like, you know, here's a list of postpartum therapists who specialize in birth trauma. My doula, you know, she came over and she really missed the opportunity to be with me where I was, you know. Instead it was really like, isn't it fun to play with your baby? And I was like, I couldn't even, I was like silenced. Like I couldn't even, like you'd ask like how I processed a little after. I sent a couple of text messages the next day to my best friends, and I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to talk about this. And
that's wild.
I was further silenced, right? By people who I don't think that they're bad, but I think that they just were like, maybe worried I would sue them, maybe worried about like, I can't take the trauma. Like it's like too hot for me, which is then like, then that's okay. You don't have to be the person. Help me find someone who is.
Absolutely.
Right. Or tell my husband, you know what, Rachel really needs to talk to someone. Here's a list of people. And then like go back and like, again, and I should say like my friends though, and my husband and my family, they were mostly able to be with me, but they're not professionals. That's not their training.
Yeah.
You know?
It's really interesting. Like I not of course, not exactly the same story, but my first was born, like I had a complete birth plan, did centering pregnancy care, which I think is a wonderful thing that needs to probably take off around the country. It was incredible. Really, really care, like loved my midwife. It was fantastic. And then I was in labor all day. She didn't realize it. I didn't realize it. And the baby was born in the back of the car on the side of the highway, dead of night. My husband was trying to get me through it. I thought he slipped out into my underwear and I was too scared to pull my underwear off. So I assumed he was dead. So like not the same trauma, but it took me a really, really long time to balance the idea that I had this natural, you know, like wonderful, no intervention labor, but it was okay to still call it traumatic. It took me a good multiple years to call it actual traumatic. It took me until he was probably 10 or 11 to actually start therapy myself and actually talk about it. And I was like, why do we need to talk about this? I'm like, it's been a decade. And she's like, because we do. Like, we're gonna, I mean, of course, the first time you go to therapy as a middle-aged woman. You know, you get down to the family at some point and your parents and whatever, but we spent a good few months right there in that moment. And I'm like, why are we doing this? And she said, because it's still coming up, but it's coming up in ways that maybe you can't figure out that that's what it is. But that night, in the dead of night, and on the side of the highway where you thought your baby was dead, it's still leading for you to be reactive. You're still getting scared in moments that you're not really realizing you're getting scared in. So it took me a good decade to finally work through some of those feelings. And I think that I wish, kind of the same thing you said, like, I wish that my midwife would have kind of just called it out at the time and said, hey, you know what, you might not be ready to talk to me now, but I've been in practice for, 40 some years, and you're going to need to work through this at some point. I'm just letting you know. Most people, it's going to catch up with them. Just kind of like how I started this podcast. Like, it's going to catch up with you at some point. It's going to show up in really bizarre ways. And at some point, you're going to need to take a step back and work through it. And it's funny, you were talking about, your other birth that was beautiful. I had literally 5 beautiful births after his that were healing and wonderful and perfect and great, but it still doesn't take away that night.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just first of all, I'm sorry that you went through that. And I also it makes me think, first of all, it's so important to point out that even a natural, which is, what a lot of people think that they want.
It's a gold standard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can be traumatizing. And, as I was working on this book, I had friends who were like, I was sort of afraid to tell you that I found my birth traumatizing, because they had an intervention-free, let's say, vaginal labor. And it's like, the measure of what is traumatizing is the person, right? You're the person to say. And it's like the actual way the baby made it out doesn't have anything to do with the feelings. And just some people, it's the other things that some people have on paper what seems to be extremely traumatic experiences, and they come out feeling okay. They don't feel traumatized. And that is also partly, there's some data that says that it's because they feel heard by their providers. Like, that is really an important part of it. But again, it's just like we can't say what is traumatizing to another person. Yeah. It's not appropriate.
For a really long time, I thought even using the word trauma with that birth was literally taking away something from people who had stories like yours. And it really got me to the point where I realized I needed to talk about it in a way like I just did, where, you know what, it was a big deal and it was really fucking scary. And I wish on the other side that people had held space for it. And I think that you're absolutely right. Like, we can label that ourselves and we can ask for that space, and hopefully people are there to give it to us. Couple more things that I want to talk about. So if we kind of start to put a somewhat positive spin on the idea of what do we think we can do for each other, as well as kind of going into a birth, to potentially advocate in a way or set things up in a way where maybe we aren't being led down this path where the way our baby comes into the world doesn't really matter to others. I mean, I have some ideas, but I would love to get some of your ideas too.
So I love this question, because one big thing about my book and talking about this is I don't want to be freaking people out, scaring them, right? My one of my goals is we should respect really birth more overall, and respect C-sections more, right?
You didn't. Just an FYI. I did not find your book at all fearful. So
good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
It was beautiful.
Thank you. I think that, actually being open about that, you may have goals of what you'll bring to the birth and the experience, and knowing that it might not turn out like that, and having those conversations early on. And that could be let's say it's really important to you to have music at your birth. And so talking with the people taking care of you, okay, let's say that this turns out to be an unplanned section. I still would really like to have this music in the operating room. Or one mom was telling me she wanted her husband to sing to her when she was having her baby. So it's so beautiful. And she had an unplanned section, and he did. And so it wasn't the exact experience she wanted, but she was still able to bring in parts of what she'd hoped for. So I think that that's really important. I think in terms of what we can do, especially those of us who have already had babies or maybe don't have young ones right now, right? Is when there's a mom who's pregnant and also postpartum, really asking like, how are you doing?
Yep.
And when you go visit after the baby, it's fun to hold a new baby. It's so beautiful and hopeful and exciting. And sometimes what that mom might need is actually for her to hold her baby while you do her dishes.
Absolutely.
And you do her laundry and you sort through her mail, right? And that those visits aren't about you. They're about what the mom needs. So I think like changing what our expectations are in terms of like community is one thing that's super important. And also like, and I think that this really depends on people's personalities, but on the individual level, like what kinds of checking in feels like appropriate. Like I wouldn't I have a friend who just had a baby. She had a planned section as her first baby. We talked about like, here's some things you might want to have on hand for recovery. Like here's things that are going to be hard for you that your doctor might not have mentioned. Like it's hard to open the dishwasher, right? Like it's hard to bend down and pick up a shoe or something. And, she was like, I feel all set, whatever. And then she had the baby and it was really harder than she had expected. And, I offered to like come over. She didn't want me there. Totally fine. Called her again the next week. And she was like, yeah, what I really want is for you to take me out for coffee. I want to get out of my house. So like continuing to offer in a way that's like not pressuring somebody to accept so that you feel good about yourself, but like offers on the table. Hey, just checking in, offers on the table. I can drop off food. It doesn't have to be a social visit.
Yep. I love it. And we talk about that a lot in our book, is like how to build that village, like and how to respect wherever other people are. To go back to your first point, what I really want people who hear this to know is that doctors are not the end all be all. Like there are certain rules in an operating room, but you can ask for things.
Yes.
You can ask for music. We have a labor dress that we sell as a clothing company that there's zero reason that it cannot be worn in an operating room. If you do not want a gown on for a planned C-section, we have beautiful dresses that you can wear. There are ways we have a hospital here in town that has a clear drape.
I love
so you
that
have
you're
the
talking
family.
about this. Yes.
Yeah, the family-centered cesarean sections can happen. So if you think, or of course it's not normally on people's list, a cesarean section, but if you do write a birth plan for, hey, you know what? If I'm headed to the OR, these are the things that I want. You can bring that to the hospital too, whether they follow them or not, but really, really think through it. Google a family-centered cesarean.
Yes.
Figure out what people have gotten approved before. And if somebody says no to you, it's not wrong. You don't have to be a perfect patient. Like you can say why. You can ask somebody why. And it's not like they're going to be mean to you or not care for you or whatever. Like you can challenge people to get what you want because you matter. And like that's the part, is like we show up in these places and they put hospital gowns on us and they make us think that we're sick sometimes and they take some of our power away. And it's kind of crap,
I really, really love that you're bringing this up, because I think a lot of hospitals might not advertise that they offer so-called family or gentle C-sections, but they do. So like a clear drape so you can see your baby being born. You don't see the yucky part of the operation. You just see your baby. Some hospitals you can ask, like, you want immediate skin to skin after the C-section. We want to initiate breastfeeding in the OR, right? Like, and if everybody's doing well, right? Like there's no reason why they can't do that. Or if you want, maybe you don't know the sex of your baby and you want your partner to announce like it's a boy. And what's so important for people to know is that this doesn't mean the procedure is going to be any different. This is about an attitude in the operating room. And it's a way for you to bring back your agency and also like, this is my birth, and mentioning the gown that you sell. I think one thing I heard about from one mom was like, she felt about the hospital gown. She was very exposed, and in an operating room, you can be very exposed, and that was very uncomfortable for her. And so she talked in advance with her OB, like, I really, like, when you put in the catheter, like, don't just like, like have me naked, like, just like, please take this. She also wore a gown that she chose. Please take this and just put it above my knees. And that kind of thing, it like makes it not like this medical procedure where you have no, I don't know, a sense of self or identity or humanity. It's like, hey, I'm the birthing person here. I'm having my baby.
Yeah. It was wild to me the first time that like we saw when we put this we made this gown, and I made it a long time ago. One of my best kind of like mom mentors was like the head of one of the first doula organizations in the United States, and she passed away from cancer a few years ago. But one of her big things when she taught these doula classes was, hey, you don't have to have your people put on a gown. Like, have them bring clothes. Like, let's figure out how to mentally, get away from the idea that women are sick. So we made this dress, and I didn't really think much of it until it kept selling out in like extra large through 3X and extra large and 3X and extra large and 3X. And I couldn't figure out what was happening until I checked my privilege and was just like, what is going on? And those gowns are wide open for like anyone over like size 12. Like, it is wild to me that we are not creating something on these, especially maternity wards, where you do want to encourage movement and you do want to encourage people getting up. Why are we not getting something where it people feel like safe and secure and, oh, God forbid, like beautiful and strong and competent, I could talk about this stuff for hours, but it's wild. So there's those options as well. I think that just because your birth may shift from something that you feel like you may be a little bit more in control of, and you're on a birth ball and you have the peanut between your legs and you have the twinkly lights in your room, just because it shifts into more of a medical procedure does not mean you lose your agency.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I think that that's a huge takeaway, is that if 1 in 3 births are ending in cesarean and you're putting yourself into the system and into the hospital, come up with some ideas of what you think that you might want and ask for things, because you can. And even the simple act of asking for things, even if they say no, hopefully gives us a little bit more power and a little bit of voice in the process. So
yeah. And asking why they say no, right? Is it a sterility issue?
Exactly.
Is it like,
1,000%.
if you're like, I want to bring my doula with me, and if they say no, is it because like it's a small operating room? Or like, is there not really a reason? Because some people do bring their doulas with them and their partner into the OR. Just because a doctor says no doesn't mean that they will not, you can ask, like, they're not this end all be all amazing. I don't know. Yes, they're wonderful. They save lives. I get it. But like, you have just as much say in how your baby is brought to the world as somebody who's doing 10 C-sections a day. And you're kind of probably just another human being to them at that point, which is a horrible thing to say, but no, but you have your system, right? Like, if you think about, like, if you reflect, like, think about I think about this with my kids. Sometimes my kids will ask me for something and I'm just like, no. And then they're like, why? Or like, and then I'm like, wait, why am I even saying no to that? Like, I just like knee jerk, and then, so then it's the same thing. If like someone says no, then push back why? And then they're like, well, actually, I guess we could find a way to do that. Yeah. And it could mean the world to you. It could literally change the entire moment of all of it. Exactly. So yeah, this has been the best thing ever. We need to just keep talking forever. I could talk about this all day long. I think your book, I'm going to wrap up the same way we started. Your book is a gift. And anybody in their childbearing years or past it that still holds on to however their babies came into the world, or just wants to learn how to support other moms in general, go check it out. You said you don't care where people buy it. Amazon. Wherever you like to buy your books. Yeah, Amazon or Barnes & Noble or your local bookstore. Yeah. Are you going to write another one? What's next? I'm working on it. I actually started working on it. I'm looking at this sort of like the history of herbalism and how herbal remedies are something that are especially important for women's health, because so much of women's health is not treated or recognized by the pharmaceutical companies, but at the same time, they're like not always evidence-based. So you have to sort of be like, what do I trust? What do I believe? And about things that are like, again, they're not thoroughly researched, right? Think about like milk supply. Yeah. I'm a fan. So I will read anything you put out, because I think that from a journalistic perspective, plus some of the own anecdotes you added to it, it was this beautiful mix of vulnerability and memoir with prescriptiveness. So congratulations on getting that ratio perfect. And thank you. I hope everybody goes out and buys it and feels seen. And thank you. I'm so sorry about how that baby arrived in the world, but you've done such an amazing job healing and turning it into a gift for others. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Melissa. It means so much to me. Thanks for being here. Thank you.